This is The Dragon's Roar by Priestess of Groove, narrated by RileyRoxx. Chapter 36. Jamie 12. Jamie thought the Red Keep looked different with Aemon standing in the middle of it, dressed in his armor and a simple crown. But maybe it had less to do with appearance, and more to do with how the Red Keep felt. He had long loathed this place. Walking through it made his skin itch, as if he were wearing clothing of poor quality. But it was simply a place he could not call home. At least not while it had been filled with Robert and his excesses. Because of Robert, ilk like Cersei, Baelish, Sir Maren Trant, and Sir Barros Blount were allowed to prosper and coat the Red Keep in their filth. Already, he could feel a cleansing, and he breathed deep the muggy air of King's Landing. He dismounted his horse, same as Aemon, and stepped up to flank him like a king's guard. Sir Barristan gave him an amused look, as he flanked on the other side. Old habits die hard, Jamie thought, glaring at Barristan a little bit. Aemon stepped up to half a dozen lords who had already knelt down in front of him. At their kneeling, the rest of the soldiers in the keep had promptly dropped down to their knees. A quick glance around showed there wasn't a hostile face among them. They appeared relieved and resigned. Of the men in front of Aemon, Jamie recognized Lord Beric Dondarrion, Edric Dane, Thoros of Myr, Lord Ariston Selmy, and Sir Balon Swan. Judging by the green turtle sigil on the last lord's armor, he could only assume he was a family member of House Estermont. "Rise," Aemon said simply. His voice was teal in his excitement. "Your Grace," Beric said in a voice of dark blue, clearly calm about the invasion. "I am Lord Beric Dondarrion of Blackhaven. I pledge my house to you. This is my squire, Edric Dane." Aemon nodded and looked to the other lords who had risen along with them. Lord Arstan glanced over at Sir Barristan, looking nervous. Sir Barristan still had the rope holding Renly. "Where are the other Storm Lords?" Aemon asked, peering around the keep. "Still sleeping off their hangovers, I imagine," Beric replied, grimacing. "The lords that are here and myself are planning on throwing Renly to you on the morn." "Oh," Aemon asked, eyes wide. "His foolhardiness was going to cost lives. We've been counseling him this whole time to surrender, but he wouldn't listen. The folks in King's Landing and our soldiers were going to be thrown into a needless battle. We were just getting ready to capture Renly when the first soldiers' bodies were discovered." "Well, I wonder what dashing warrior managed that," Jamie piped up, and he couldn't keep the smug smile from his face. His own voice floated in front of him, as bright as spring grass. Beric's eyebrows shot up. "It was you, Sir Jamie." Aemon rolled his eyes. "Yes, well, you did well, Jamie." "Did well? I brought you Renly without so much as a hair out of place, and took the keep bloodlessly. It was flawless." "You shoved Renly off your horse when you brought him to me." "It was still flawless." Aemon drew his mouth into a line that was to suggest astonishment, but he seemed to be fighting a smile. Beric and Lord Arstan appeared disgruntled to have been outdone by the Kingslayer. His smile did falter as he thought about the soldiers and Brienne lying in the hallway. "Those soldiers did live, didn't they?" "Yes, they lived," Beric replied. "And the Lady Warrior?" "The Lady Warrior?" Beric asked with a frown. "You mean the Lady Brienne of Tarth?" "Are there any other Lady Warriors here?" Jamie asked with an edge to his voice. "I hadn't realized you knocked her out too. I haven't seen her since yesterday." Jamie sucked in a breath and tried to control his fear. I left her in the middle of a hallway. Did some soldiers find her and have their way with her while she was unconscious? He would never forgive himself if harm befell her because she was unconscious. Just as he put a hand on Bright Roar, he saw his wench step out of a hallway and into the light. She appeared groggy, as if she was only just woken, but her armor was in place, and when she found stability, she glanced around at the inner yard and stared at all of the soldiers. When her gaze fell on him, she scowled but stayed close to the entrance. No doubt, she understood the fruitless effort it would be to go back inside. Despite her clear anger, he relaxed. He had no doubt she would hate his guts right out of the gate, but he had managed to overcome her ire before. All I need is a chance, he thought. Is that her right over there? Eamon asked, looking through the lords who all turned. Aye, that's her, your grace, Beric said. She looks formidable, Eamon said, casting a sly look at Jaime. She is. She outfought Sir Loras Tyrell in the yard a few days prior. Eamon's eyebrows shot up, and he seemed unable to control his amusement. Impressive. Speaking of Loras, Jaime began, desperate to change the subject. Where is he? He's right where you left him, Beric replied, a snarl twisting his face. Jaime quirked an eyebrow at him. Still tied up too. The fact that he was missing from the outer yard suggested that that was the case. By your leave, your grace, I'll go get Sir Loras. Eamon nodded absent-mindedly at him, having already turned to address his soldiers. Jaime was almost at the bottom of the Tower of the Hand when an indignant voice said, You! He turned to see Sir Balon Swan pointing at Cyrus, who was still atop his horse. Jaime did a double take on Cyrus when he realized his goatee was already gone. He had an entirely too innocent expression on his face. Me, he said in mock outrage. I should have known you were an infiltrator, Balon grumbled. Oh, well, you didn't, Cyrus replied. Most of the rest of the shepherds were looking tired, but amused. David dismounted and approached Eamon, but Jaime was already too far away to hear the conversation between them. He hurried up the stairs to the room of the Hand on his own. He opened the door and strode through. Loras was indeed as he had left him, naked, under the sheets, but he was now awake and glaring. The Red Keep has fallen. Your lover is in our hands. You want things to go pleasantly for him. You'll behave, Jaime growled. The first thing he grabbed was Loras's sword and placed it by the door. Grabbing the knife at his belt, he sliced through the ropes on his Loras's hands and then the ones at his feet. Put some clothes on. Your family awaits you, Jaime ordered, stepping back to stand by the door. Loras glowered at him from the bed, but slowly began putting on his clothes. When he was done, Jaime picked up Loras's sword once more, holding it firmly in his hand as he walked over. Loras's eyes followed his sword, but he made no move to nab it. Jaime put a knife to his back. Now, walk. They took the stairs at a sedentary pace, and Jaime had to wonder if he was dreading seeing his family. Since he had been found in the Hand's room, the rumors would spread swiftly about his and Renly's proclivities. Followers of the Seven didn't take kindly to men who lie with other men. The Tyrells as a whole would in all likelihood suffer for this. Maybe this will keep the Tyrells in line, with the marriages already arranged for them, Jaime thought. He could only hope. But in the meantime, he'd watch them closely. Back on the grounds, he noticed groups of soldiers were bringing wavering and stumbling lords to a wooden table that had been set up. David was sitting on one half taking notes. Winterfell's soldiers were stripping lords of their weapons, and the merchant that traveled with the shepherds was taking inventory of said weapons. Podrick Payne and Olivar Frey stood quivering with excitement at David's elbow, likely ready to relay messages across the castle. Eamon was watching the proceedings quietly and from a distance. Colors of sound flew here and there, darting across his vision like birds. Jamie carefully walked Loris over to Eamon. His king glanced at him, evaluating Loris for a moment, and then seemed to dismiss him of hand. "What's going on?" Jamie whispered. "There's too much to do to accept pledges of fealty today. I will hold my crowning ceremony tomorrow, and then I'll accept the pledges. Until then, their weapons are to be stored apart from them." "I see," Jamie said. "You know, you could probably wait a week for your crowning ceremony and make a proper celebration." Eamon looked at him as if he didn't know him. "We don't have time for that, or the money. We have work to do." "And that is what sets you apart from Robert Baratheon." "I hope there's more than that separates us," Eamon replied. "Speaking of, I intend to have him moved to a cell in the dungeons before the sun sets." "Good. Best to get all the loose ends squared away," Jamie replied. "Loris!" "Speaking of loose ends," Jamie muttered. He sheathed the knife he was using to hold Loris in place. The man had obediently stood there, looking around at the happenings. There was no mistaking the disgusted expressions on the Stormland soldiers. Lord Arstan, Sir Balon, and Beric shot glares at him in equal measure. "Here." Jamie held Loris's sword out to him. Loris looked at it as though it were a venomous snake preparing to bite him. "I'm allowed my weapon?" "Your family has already pledged their support to me. Don't make them regret it, asking for immunity for you," Eamon said. His voice had an unmistakable sharpness to it. Loris clenched his jaw and then asked in a bitter orange voice, "What is to happen to Renly, your grace?" Eamon stared at him with an air of superiority. "You will find out with the rest of the kingdoms tomorrow." "It was suggested to me by Lord Jamie that my good behavior would benefit Renly." "Your good behavior only affects your standing with me. I suggest you do not disappoint your family," Eamon replied, and with that Jamie nudged him to get him moving. As soon as they were out of earshot of the king, Loris glared at Jamie. "You lied to me." "It made things easy, though, didn't it?" Jamie said. "Come on, your family awaits." Loris walked over, still glowering like a sulking child, and Jamie followed. Willis had apparently seen the open gates of King's Landing and immediately arranged for transport up to the Red Keep. Both he and his father were now climbing out of the carriage. Willis was stumping over to them as hastily as his game leg would allow, his young face full of anguish. "Brother, it is good to see you." Willis did not bother with propriety as he threw himself at his brother in a hug. "It is done," Jamie said as soon as Willis released Loris from the hug. "I have fulfilled my bargain. Your brother has been delivered to you unharmed, by me personally as I promised." "Thank you, Lord Jamie. You have indeed kept your promise. House Tyrell will not forget this favor you've done." "Son!" Mace Tyrell restrained himself from hugging Loris and merely clapped a hand on his shoulder. Aemon smirked at him as he sauntered back. "You look like a cat who got the cream." "I took the Red Keep bloodlessly and fulfilled a promise I made to the Tyrells," Jamie replied, raising his head up to stare imperiously down at Aemon. He only chuckled and whispered, "You may impress others with that line, but I don't think you'll impress Brienne." Probably not, Jamie thought with a troubled frown. Brienne would be pleased about that, but only grudgingly so at first. Her beloved Renly was at least alive, and that was the best she could hope for. "Ghost," Aemon called out. Jamie shook himself of his thoughts to find that Robb had appeared with the direwolves in tow. Both Ghost and Greywind barreled toward them with their tongues streaming behind them. When reared up on their hind legs, they were now taller than Eamon. He had to push Ghost away so he wouldn't throw him to the ground. Easy, boy. Calm down, calm down. You too, Grey Wind. I'm glad to see you too. Ghost and Grey Wind both sat at attention to his commands, still panting. The Stormland soldiers all froze upon seeing the gigantic beasts. Rob strode over with a proud smile on his face. Grey Wind broke away to fall in step with Rob. He gave his cousin a short bow and said, "Your Grace, I wish to congratulate you on your victory." "Why, thank you, cousin. I couldn't have done it without Jamie, though," Eamon said with a grin. Jamie smirked. "With pleasure, Your Grace." "Yes, Lord Jamie. My father told me about what you've done. Most impressive. I have to admit, though, I was looking forward to fighting in my first battle." Eamon's smile faltered, but only minimally. "Don't you fret, Rob. There are more battles ahead of us. Real ones." Jamie's good mood deflated as he struggled to keep the smile on his face. The long night loomed. Maybe the rest of the North felt it was far off, but to Jamie, it felt more like a great beast stalking them, taking slow, predatory steps ever closer. Even now, he still expected to feel the first chill breezes of the approaching fall at any moment. He knew that it was still years out, but the days were slipping away like grains of sand through his hand. We still have enough time. We're already leagues ahead of where we were in the time before, he thought. If he remembered correctly, old Ned Stark would have been handed the king for about 2 months now. It was around this time Tyrion would have been kidnapped, and Jamie would have ridden off to his rescue. "Jamie, what comes next?" Eamon asked, mirroring the troubled expression that he now had. I'm not the right person to ask that question," Jamie replied. "I need Dany. I need to go to Dorne to negotiate them into the fold. We need dragonstone so we can start mining for dragonglass. We need a fleet. We need to go to the Iron Islands and make sure they're in line. We need to begin food storage. We need—" "You're already giving me a headache," Jamie muttered, wincing. "I'm not good at administration. I'm a knight, a soldier, a commander. You might want to pick a new hand." "Oh, no. You're stuck sharing the burden of ruling with me. For now," Eamon said. "As your grace commands," Jamie sighed. "Just take each day one step at a time. Figure out what you need today, and then that will free up tomorrow to start." Eamon groaned. "I don't want to make a list. We both know what the Red Keep's like." "What if you did it in that cipher trick I mentioned?" he whispered. Eamon frowned at Jamie. "You still need to teach me that. Maybe this evening, when we're done here." Eamon opened his mouth to answer when a shout cut across the yard, attracting every man's attention. "David!" The healer became as rigid as a tree, and he turned his head with creaking slowness that suggested apprehension. Then he fixed a smile on his face that held all the life of a wight. "Lord Jason Mallister. Imagine that." Jamie couldn't quite decipher the color in David's voice. It was a horrid dark green color mixed with the malice of red, like nothing he'd ever seen before. Lord Mallister, a towering man with silver hair and a beard, strode across the grounds to the table. Jamie was certain he saw the healer recoil in that same rigid way, like an oak tree bending with the wind. "I never thought I'd see you again. How have you been?" "Fine," David said with his wooden smile. "When did you take over from your Lord Father?" "Yes. My Lord Father Duncan passed away nearly 20 years ago. I'm married now and have a son, Patrick. What about you? How did you get here?" Lord Mallister looked around among the soldiers and lords, as though expecting someone to claim him. "I am Lord Hen Jaime Lannister's designated healer," David said, his eyes darting to Jaime. Jaime frowned but said nothing. "Your designated healer, huh?" Aemon asked with a knowing look. "Close enough," Jaime said. The shepherds were all but officially under his protection. Jason Mallister turned to him and nodded in appraisal, clearly impressed. "You've done well for yourself. I'm glad." "Uh-huh. Is there any news of my parents?" "Your father passed the same year mine did. Your mother was assistant to the new maester and the town midwife until she passed 10 years ago. I know she always wondered what happened to you." "Shame. Would have been nice to see her one last time," David said, and he actually did look regretful, but there was no mistaking the apprehension in his face. "Forgive me, my lord, but King Aemon has asked me to be working right now. I must get this done before his evening meal." "Of course. Sorry to bother. I'd always wondered what happened to you." "Alive and well," David replied, the dead smile back on his face, and if Jaime wasn't mistaken, Lord Mallister looked nervous. Once the lord walked away, the smile fell, and David glared after him. "I'd forgotten he told me he was born and raised at Seaguard," Jaime muttered. He watched Lord Mallister until he disappeared into the crowd. They watched for a moment, as orders were carried out, then Aemon nudged Jaime and said, "Everything seems to be running smoothly. I need to speak with you about that thing I mentioned in the tent the other day." Jaime internally winced. He did not want to receive this news if Aemon's face was anything to go by. He heaved a sigh. "Very well, let's find somewhere private." "Where's the Godswood?" "Over there." Jaime led the way through a door. Once it had closed behind them, silence fell on them, and he breathed in relief. The activity and all the colors were beginning to muddle his senses. If he didn't want a headache, he would have to excuse himself. But then, what kind of hand to the king am I if I can't stand next to my king on the day of our victory? As soon as they stepped into the woods, Ghost charged out into the greenery, disappearing among the trees. "I'm glad they didn't burn the rest of this forest down. When they uprooted all the weirwood trees, it'll be nice to come here and get away," Aemon said. They just came in sight of the makeshift heart tree, when Jaime came to such a sudden stop that Aemon almost ran into him, and he stared. The rope he had used to hang himself on the heart tree was still dangling from the branch. The wood had partially grown over it, encasing it forever to be a part of the tree. "I forgot I left it like this," Jaime whispered. They cautiously approached. The rope was almost entirely black and frayed apart. When nudged by the breeze, it swayed rigidly, with none of the usual flexibility. Aemon stepped up to look at the rope, for a moment reached toward it, but in the last instant he pulled his hand and shrank back. "I'm sorry, Jaime," he whispered. Jaime gave him a wry look. "There's nothing you could have done." "I know. That someone should have been here for you." "You didn't fail me. I failed myself. Jaime, I couldn't have blamed you for your decision. My 6 months alone was enough to make me doubt my own mind. You lived near 15 years with that doubt. You're far stronger than I could ever be," he said. "What's done is done. That's behind us now. I feel like I'm only going to add to your woes." "How much worse could it get?" Aemon glared at him. "And then it gets worse. When I reached Riverrun, I received news that Cersei made it to Bear Island." Jaime couldn't keep from smirking. "Throwing her to the Mormont women, I see. Very good. But That wasn't all that was in the letter. The Maester of Bear Island conducted an examination of Cersei upon her arrival. She's pregnant. He actually fell back into the heart tree. He gaped at Aemon, his mind reeling and his mouth suddenly dry, and he shook his head. No. Say it isn't true. It's true, Aemon said. I also received news from the Tyrells that you were missing. I thought you might be dead. He grinded his teeth and growled. The Ironborn. So, I consulted with my uncle on this. The child will be raised at Winterfell. If you have any objection to that, then we can make new arrangements. Can I trust her? Aemon drew his mouth into a thin line. I made it clear in my letter that Lady Catelyn is to treat the child with the respect that is due House Lannister. She wouldn't dare ignore this order. You feel free to write to her and tell her your thoughts. She knows that I will support you in almost anything you say, short of demanding her head. I trust you to be at least somewhat measured in your response. Jaime nodded numbly, still slumped against the tree. Then he looked up and asked, What of Cersei? Cersei is to never see the child. She will not know its gender. She will not name it. She will spend the rest of her days on Bear Island, never to be seen or heard of again by the mainland. I still say that's too good for her. I'm sorry. Aemon stepped forward and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. If you need anything, you need only ask. I suggest you get some rest before this evening. He nodded again, and Aemon left. He had been looking forward to his bed that night, sleeping on the high of victory, but even thousands of miles away, Cersei still plagued him. Eventually, he left the Godswood. He wasn't quite sure of his destination until he stepped out and set eyes on the White Tower. His room was still there. Brother, you're victorious. I heard what you did. Quite clever of you. Come, we should celebrate your victory. Tyrion crowed, beaming up at him. His smile faltered slightly at the exhausted look on his brother's face, but he persisted. Not now, Tyrion. I can't. Come now. What's the matter? Whatever it is, I'm sure it can be solved with some drinking. Jaime huffed. No, not today. Tyrion scowled. Then when? You've been keeping me at arm's length, and I want to know why. I've been busy. Not so busy for a conversation. I feel like the king knows you better than I do. I imagine he does, Jaime thought, but merely shook his head. Tyrion. They both turned to see Aemon glaring. Leave your brother be. Grudgingly, he stepped out of his way, and Jaime continued on to the tower. He could feel Tyrion's eyes burning into him as he ascended the White Tower.